Wonderful. So thank you, Kate, for that, the practice of the welcoming what's here. So I'm welcoming my nerves and also my excitement to be here. So I'd like to start by speaking about our title in a way which feels like, titles are interesting, aren't they? They feel like lots of words, and what do they mean? So I'd like to start by speaking about our title. And unlike the speakers before, I have got notes because there's a time limit and I must keep myself focused. So excuse me for using my notes. So in conversations, we may find ourselves listening to another person while thinking about what we might say in response. You know, particularly if the person is sharing something complex or difficult, we may find ourselves having this urge to fix. So while we're listening, the mind is pretty busy trying to sort of figure out what's the most helpful thing to say. So this urge to fix, to find answers. It might be that we notice the conversation feels tight or constricted. So this concept of embodied dialogue goes beyond this natural mental processing. So it's quite natural for us to be thinking while listening. But this concept of embodied dialogue is about creating conditions for a more connected conversation, more grounded conversation with another person. So in this embodied dialogue, we're really talking about connecting in, as Kate was guiding us, connecting into our inner experience, our own present moment, so beyond just the head, but tuning into our whole body and our heart. We're sensing into the other person, maybe a sense of attunement. And there may be a sense of shared feelings of resonance through this way of connecting. So this sets the stage, or suggesting this sets the stage for a deeper connection, one imbued with compassion and wisdom, maybe a more spacious connection. So in the keynote, we're going to start with sort of the big picture and talk a little bit about relationality. That's already been named here, about the importance of us being social beings. And then we want to zoom in a little and introduce our mindfulness-based supervision framework, our model, which highlights the relationship between these main concepts that are named in our title. And then we want to move in a little closer still to explore ways that we might each actively bring these heart qualities into our next conversations within work and within our lives. So here's this big picture in your way. Relationality. So this is a philosophical, anthropological, and social concept proposing that we are shaped by our relationships with other people, communities, cultures, the environment, nature, ideas. So in fields like philosophy and sociology, relationality pushes back against this sort of independent self and instead sees that our identity is something that's formed through connection. So being through relationships, and these themes have already been named here today. So we're the sum of our connections, bound up in each other. And this feels like an increasingly essential concept, as we're beginning to navigate more challenging times within our lives and within the world. So this intrinsic relationality shapes our identities, our well-being, and our shared future. So here we're pointing to just two philosophies. The first, Ubuntu, so honouring the long history of this. It's rooted in ancient African cultures. A philosophy about interconnectedness, about interdependence, kindness and community, including deep connections with the land and with our ancestors. So this forms a way of life, a collection of values and practices, including responsibility for our human beings and for the world, our fellow human beings in the world. So different definitions that you might know of Ubuntu, it's often translated as I am because we are. So a person is a person through other people. And the second, this more contemporary movement, the Charter for Compassion. So this recognises that interconnectedness the nature of all humanity and living things. And this is a 2009 document with a call to the world to replace violence and polarisation with empathy, compassion and justice. So it calls for restoring compassion to the centre of morality and religion, recognising the suffering of others, including one's enemies. So let's move in now a little closer to mindfulness, and particularly social mindfulness. So Clara mentioned this earlier, so through, we might well start in mindfulness as a more internal, a more self-investigation. But through our practice of mindfulness, we begin to recognise this interconnectedness. We begin to see how all things rely on causes and conditions, that nothing exists independently. And John Kabat-Zinn has always emphasised relationality at the heart of contemporary mindfulness. So he refers to it actually as a training in relationality. So it may be that when we first begin our mindfulness practice, there's much more of this self-focus, this inner awareness. And then likely soon we start to discover that our practice begins to influence our awareness of the other, this outward focus. And there are many programs now focusing on interpersonal mindfulness or social mindfulness. And it's quite interesting that many people who do an initial 8-week course maybe to focus on this inner awareness often then are really curious and hungry to explore mindfulness in the social field. So Fritz Koster and his colleagues pulled together a collection of essays in their book that highlight this growing interest in developing wise and compassionate communication within the complex arenas that we find ourselves in. So relationality creates the foundation. If we understand ourselves as interconnected, then other people's experiences matter to us, and the experiences of the world matter to us. So mindfulness not only as a personal practice, but as something that shapes how we meet the world. So it's this inner and outer awareness that we'd like to explore a bit more. So we'd like to move in closer now to what we're calling nurturing relationships. And so maybe an opportunity for all of you here to consider how these concepts and qualities that we're exploring might support you within your communications, within your interpersonal connections. So we might see these nurturing relationships as sort of arising in two contexts. So in the top half of the diagram, these might be where perhaps through your work, you're taking on a particular role, where there's clearly a mentoring role in your work. So this might be supervisor, mentor, coach, teacher, leader, line manager, where there's clearly this sense that you're in this supporting the growth and well-being of another. And in a way, our book was originally written from that perspective, from supervising or mentoring, so from this top layer. But we've also become increasingly curious about actually this bottom side, where within any relationship, as a parent, as a friend, we might move into at times these places where there might be what we call nurturing moments, if you like, where we might find ourselves in a place where we want to be able to step into offering support and care, guidance maybe for another. So I'd like to invite now just a brief reflection to support you all maybe to connect to one or other of these, so that then you maybe take that forward as I hand over to Alison shortly. So maybe just inviting you, perhaps if you've lost contact with your feet and seat, maybe it's just me, but let's feel feet and seat. Be aware of body and breath for a moment. And perhaps for those of you that are in a mentoring role, so maybe you identify with that top part of the circle of nurturing relationships. So maybe an opportunity to consider, how you might extend the parameters of bringing these themes of embodied presence, compassion, and wisdom into your connections, relationships with mentees. Maybe bringing to mind now a particular mentee. maybe a recent experience with them. And just inviting a sense of curiosity around, how might I deepen my connection with them? How might I explore, how might I be within this next opportunity for a nurturing moment? And for those of you here who are not in a mentoring role in a workplace context, maybe bringing to mind and heart someone in your life now. Someone where you feel moved to move into this nurturing role, even if it's just briefly. So it might be in your role as parent, or friend, with a colleague. And again, maybe bringing them to mind. Perhaps they're going through something at the moment, and you feel moved to offer a sense of presence, qualities of heart and mind to support them in this moment. So an invitation to hold in mind this person you brought, whether it's work context or personal, and holding them in mind and heart as I asked Alison, who will describe our model, and just seeing what resonates for you in your context.
So thank you, Pamela, and really good to see you all. So I'm just having that moment of noticing how it is to stand up. What did you call it? An introvert's nightmare. And I can't work out if I'm excited or a nightmare, but it's good to be here. So I too have got some notes, and really it's in many ways it's to keep me on track. I would love to talk for hours and hours about our work, but I'm going to keep myself more concise. So as Pamela said, this framework that we have developed, but it's been developed by a lot of people over the years, probably about 12 years, and it's designed to kind of, in a way, give a map of what mindfulness-based supervision, mindfulness-based mentoring looks like. It's kind of, in many ways, it's built up from intuition. You were talking about intuition, and it's helping to give it a sort of frame. So it was designed with mindfulness-based supervision in mind. So it was designed, particularly around NBCT and MBSR supervision to begin, and then it's really kind of broadening out. And what it has in mind is that the supervisor or the mentor has a mindfulness practice. So it's not just like bringing a few techniques in here and there, but it's embodied. So they have a practice. And hopefully the supervisee or the mentee also has a practice, but maybe a fledgling kind of practice. But what we've been finding as we were writing the book and as the book's come out is that increasingly aspects of this framework feel really relevant to, as Pamela was describing, many different sorts of mentoring type relationships we might find ourselves in within our workplace. So this is the full framework. I'm not going to go into all of it in the interest of time, so I'm going to go into what we're calling the walks. So if we just have the next slide. So you can see I'm sort of going to focus a little bit on some sections of this. And maybe if we could just flip to the other one a moment, and I'll come back to this one. Sorry, the next one on Pamela, the walk one, yeah. So many of you might know this metaphor that comes from weaving, and in weaving, I need to use my notes a minute here, you have the warp threads, that one's, what's that, that's vertical, isn't it? Vertical, going down, that stay the same, they're steady, they're strong, and then you have the weft that gets woven, that's often patterned, the colours, and it changes. So these warp threads are what we consider, makes mindfulness-based supervision mindful, and ones that are essential and need to be there all of the time. So they're the backbone of the fabric. So we'll go back to the container now. Yeah. So this is what we see as the essential aspects of mindfulness-based supervision and mentoring, the walk. So on the outer circle, this outer layer, I'm going to go into them all a little bit. We have what we call the container. So we call this the container of mindfulness. You can see this white area, we have space. I'm going to say more about it. And in the middle we have mutual inquiry, so this embodied mutual dialogue. So all of these are sort of hold the entire process of what makes this an embodied, relational, mindful conversation. And in many ways this work is created through practice, so the practice of the supervisor, the mentor, both within the session but also outside of the session. And we try, in a framework, we're trying to put something in an image and put words to it and, a shape, but it's all interrelated. If we can make this move, it'll be a lot more dynamic and a lot more organic. Okay, so let's move to the next one. So coming to the container, so this was this outer one, this container, what makes it mindfulness. We've got 4 aspects here, 4 elements. We've got intention, integrity, embodied presence, and compassion and wisdom. So just very briefly looking at intention and integrity, we might see both of these elements of ways in a way that we set the compass, we set the direction, the direction of travel within this embodied conversation, within this mentoring. So intention, as many of us will know, can have a sort of macro intention, what the intentions are for the work, the practice, for being involved in this area of work. Sometimes it's more micro intentions. What are the intentions for this particular conversation, for this particular aspect of work, for this session? Aligning integrity helps us to align with our values, with ethical ways of being, with fidelity to approaches, with the integrity within the relationship. So all of these are ways that we set this direction of travel. So another aspect of the container, another element, is this embodied presence. So this way that we bring mindful awareness to, what's happening. We've been doing a lot of this already as we've been sitting here, this coming down into the body, noticing what's here, that allows us to also open to another. So this moment by moment awareness that can be body, thoughts, emotions, just to act. So we're cultivating this in our practice. We're knowing our inner landscape. And this also includes cultivating, particular attitudes of curiosity, beginner's mind, how we bring those into these conversations. And that supports this sort of mutuality. So I'm going to come to compassion and wisdom again in a moment. Yeah, so this mutual inquiry. So this is the heart of these embodied conversations, in this way that we can be tuning into what's happening to us, encouraging the other to tune into what's happening for them, and tuning into what's happening between us, the co-creation. And there are many different other sort of frameworks for these embodied conversations that you may be aware of. So when we first kind of created this framework, it's been through quite a lot of different iterations. We didn't have the word space on it. We just, there were just spaces on it. We just assumed people would know that. We thought this is such an important aspect of these conversations that we wanted to name it. So even now, we can just take a moment now, just a little pause, just 10, 20 seconds. And as we pause, we might do that feeling our feet on the ground. We might just notice the breath, breathing. And we might just continue. So we'll say more about space. But this ability we have within dialogue to create pauses, to create space, that often are really important around what happens next. We often see what we fill with, but we don't see the space. So just a little bit of summary. This walk, all of these different aspects of the walk, we're practicing the capacities for inner and outer awareness. This capacity for cultivating particular attitudes. This capacity for creating a safe, ethical space. And this allows for more responding, reflecting, co-creating, sharing. You've already heard something around this expression of vulnerability as an important part of being mindful, being compassionate. And also allows for learning, it's new learning in these spaces. So coming a little bit more to compassion and wisdom, which is the theme for this day. So in this word salad, you can perhaps see we've got kind of, in some ways, more the compassion aspects in yellow and more the wisdom aspects in blue. So really, there's a sort of slight false separation here in a way, just to try and explain almost like these different aspects of compassion. And this, in our framework, we have named the two. So, compassion is very much embedded in this process of creating a container. And perhaps we might see compassion as being a sort of the non-judging attitude we bring, the allowing. And often this allowing of uncertainty, the allowing of not knowing. And we so often want to know the answers, and often a more compassionate space allows us to be in that place. Compassion that allows attending to emotional experience, kind of restorative aspect of supervision. Very lovely ring. Yeah. We'll just take a little pause if you listen to that. Compassion. No, don't worry. Yeah. Compassion that allows us to listen. What it takes to really listen. Without our habits to rush in and fix, etc. So in many ways, compassion in mentoring and in these nurturing relationships can support, this feeling of safety, this being able to be honest, often being able to take more risks, feel cared for. Wisdom perhaps leads us a little bit more into how we discern, how we make choices, when to pause something, when to offer some guidance, when to step back, when to offer a question, when to be a little more challenging, when to inquire. So, wisdom might support a little bit more in shaping this learning and growth. And really how they work together. So I was thinking about, one of the things as a supervisor, I'm often asked sort of feedback in some way, often around quite difficult moments. So you might imagine if I'm doing that without compassion, I might offer some really useful feedback that, very clear, makes sense. But it might be quite hard for someone to take that in if there's not compassion. It might feel quite harsh. It might not resonate. Their inner critic might sort of get quite powered up. If I did it without a wisdom angle, it might be very nice, very kind, very supportive. You're doing great, fantastic. But somebody might not understand quite so much, what their strengths actually are, where they might grow, what the edges are. So very often bringing those two in together creates a stronger relationship, a stronger embodied. So I'm going to invite another little mini reflection, just for about 2 minutes. And, reflection, sometimes people like to close their eyes, sometimes keep an eyes open. I just like to invite you to consider when you've experienced receiving compassion and wisdom from a mentor of some sort, from a supervisor. So you may have several experiences in mind, maybe just one. Maybe you're just bringing that particular individual to mind. This experience of receiving compassion and wisdom. noticing how it felt, body, feelings, thoughts. Just noticing how it was shown. How did you know it as compassion and wisdom? How was it expressed? How did you receive it? And also noticing the impact for you. What did it leave you with? How did it support you in going forwards? And just letting this little mini reflection come to an end. So hopefully you were able to kind of connect in some way with an experience. Usually we've got them there, and often reflecting helps it to come alive. So this compassion and wisdom are linked to all of the elements of this container, and we can, as well as them kind of being naturally arising, we can cultivate them as well. And we also see how compassion and wisdom link into other, what we might call heart qualities: joy, appreciation, equanimity, friendliness. So all this sort of family of heart qualities being important. There are many ways that these might come into supervisory and mentoring relationships. So in the book we've come up with several examples, but maybe we might see how there's this opportunity to celebrate a mentee, a supervisee's work, celebrate their successes, what's going well. It can also be this discerning, appropriate responses. This opening to the difficult, being able to open to vulnerability. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to pass to you now.
Thank you. So just to say a little bit more about space. So there are myriad of ways that we might create space within these nurturing dialogues, within these nurturing moments. And so here we're just offering some practical ones. And it might be that, we can create space before, during and after these moments of connection. So before, maybe it's about putting the phone aside. I don't know, many of you probably notice we have this strange relationship these days, don't we, with phones. And I can think of conversations I've had with actually really good friends, and there's something extraordinary what happens when they reach for the phone in that moment when we were connecting. So there's something that feels, although it seems really obvious, about how much we're getting joined at the hips with our phones. So what would it be like to have that phone put aside in preparation to connect with another person? I certainly have been in times of meeting with a senior and how disruptive it is when their phone will ring and they'll answer in the middle of a conversation. So it seems obvious to me, but actually sometimes we have to be more, and maybe encourage another person too, so how would it be to let's put our phones aside for these moments that we're connecting. Clearing the decks, as it were, we're clearing the decks to say, you matter to me, and I'm sort of showing up for you with my full attention. Within the dialogue itself, there are ways that we might create space. As Alison was inviting earlier, maybe it is just those moments of pause. We might just slow down our speech a little, or pause when the other person has shared and just letting it land a little more, not just in the mind but in the body and heart before we respond. Sometimes it might be about widening out our awareness, particularly if what the person is sharing is complex or difficult. There's a vulnerability around it. Can be really supportive just to broaden our view. There's me and the other person, in a sense of this space around us. Some of you might know this concept of walk and talk. So sometimes there's a way of creating space, you know, if we need more space around it, walking and talking can feel sometimes more supportive than sitting face to face with someone. Something about the movement that can generate some space and allows a sort of holding of difficult emotions and experience. And afterwards, you know, taking time to pause and really feel the resonance of that connection. You know, we might do that after a conversation with a child or with a friend or a neighbour, you know, a partner. We just take a moment afterwards to pause and sense what resonates for us from that interaction, from that nurturing moment. So really inviting a curiosity around space or lack of space and what that does to the communication. And experimenting next time that you're in conversation with someone to notice where is the space, or how might I create space within this dialogue. So right now, you know, we might just notice throughout today, whenever we're in workshops or listening or in conversation with each other at lunch or the breaks, yeah, where is there space right now in this moment? Jump out.
We do quite, so this is ACT, isn't it? Or mutuality, we're talking. So, yeah, we're both really keen on kind of relational ways of working on mutuality, and can really see that happening so much in supervision. So really there's not being one person doing to another, but the mutual piece, the co-creation. And I'm sure this will be something you all know. So again, I'd like to invite a short reflection, and I'll put some sort of questions into it. So last time in the reflection, I invited you to bring to mind a moment that you have been receiving compassion and wisdom. What I'd like to do now is invite you to bring to mind a moment where you have offered. Some of you might be supervisors, some of you mentors, some of you in a slightly different role, where you have offered something of a nurturing relationship to another that's had a sort of mindfulness base. So inviting you to see if you could bring to mind a moment that you have offered mindful supervision, a mindful mentoring that went fairly well. You know, fairly well. It doesn't have to be perfect. But again, you might close your eyes, you might just rest your gaze. And just as you do so, just you might have a sense of the other person in this moment, in this conversation you had with them, their facial expression, their posture, the words, their tone. And you're just noticing, were you aware of that at the time? Were you able to connect in with them? And noticing your own process, maybe right now, but also what it was like at the time. Let's hear for you, body, feelings, thoughts. Noticing something of what's happening between you. It's a felt sense of the atmosphere between you. This shared space, how words are received, how you listen, how you speak. And there may have been some moments of pausing, of slowing down. And if so, just noticing what they were like. Or maybe they were absent. Maybe it was really full up, and it would have been lovely to have brought in a pause. Just noticing if there were any of these heart qualities being expressed. If compassion was there, appreciation, joy. How were they known, and maybe there could have been more of them. And just noticing what's here as we bring this reflection towards an end. Maybe there's something you're appreciating in that conversation. How you were, how they were, the process. Maybe there's something you'd like to take forward from this reflection. If it were to happen again, something new you might take into it. And we're just allowing this reflection to come towards an end. Sometimes after we've had a stiller moment, the body wants to move a little. Yeah. Shortly into our tea break, if your body's wanting to know. It's not long now. You can be letting it know. In many ways, I saw something waving at me. Okay, I saw 5 minutes waving at me. Okay, yeah, so that's how long you got to your tea break, as long as we're on time. So hopefully in that reflection, maybe I was kind of inviting a kind of pointing to some of the different areas of this container. The sense of how we can connect in with what's happening for ourselves. We can, connect in with what we think is happening for the other and inviting them to connect in. We can be noticing what's happening between us, and we can be allowing for co-creation, not knowing, things emerging. And how often that needs to be imbued with these qualities of compassion, of friendliness, of care, and how that makes for a very different conversation and a very different way of learning a conversation that's coming more from the head. So really at the heart of our sort of work and our framework is this: how can we bring mindfulness and compassion into these conversations in ways that really start to change the potential outcome? And really hoping that we can see this. It could be very much for supervising mindfulness teachers, but how we could be taking that out into lots of different elements of our life. Okay, so we're going to move to a summary. We're going to do a double act on the summary. So we've spoken about relationality. So relationality, is being the heart of being a human being. We've been hearing that all morning. And this relationship with ourselves, this relationship and connection we can have with others. And I would also say this, human others and non-human others. So we can really take this, way beyond, the realms of humans. And how we can bring mindfulness really into all of those relationships.
Yeah, so we're calling these nurturing relationships, or nurturing moments actually, within a relationship where we recognise the importance of holding the space for another, where we show up fully for the other person with their well-being and growth at the centre.
So we've spoken about the warp of our mindfulness-based supervision framework, so this container of mindfulness. So how we hold integrity, intention, embodied presence, compassion and wisdom. How we move into that mutual inquiry, that embodied dialogue together, and the myriad of ways that we can create space. And these are capacities that are often present, and we can cultivate them more, we can lean into them more, and how our practice inside those conversations and outside is what supports that.
So compassion arises when we feel connected to the other person and feel moved to care and to act. And wisdom about knowing, using our knowledge and experience to understand the nature of the other person's pain or dilemma and to inform what's needed in that moment to best support them.
So space, we can get very creative about ways that we create space. You know, sometimes just slowing down a little, pausing, spacing the body, you know, when we need to move and find some physical spaces as well. Creating the spaces for these conversations to happen, you know, the squeezed, busy life that we actually carve out time, we give time. So many different ways we can create space.
And this embodied dialogue, a deep connection and communication beyond words. It's a physical, emotional, and sensory experience. So we're listening with our ears and our heart and our mind, supporting this attunement and mutual discovery. So there's one conversation at a time, one connection at a time, being through relationships. Thank you.